Welcome to today's Cyber Collective. This is a new format for us. We're joined here by three special guests, which I'll introduce in a sec. But today's topic, we're really going to be covering governance, right? And culture of governance, what you should be understanding and be wary of as part of leading that as, when you're speaking to your clients and looking at what type of opportunities out there in terms of GRC type stuff. This is a new format where I've wanted to go through and get an SME, a subject matter expert, plus a partner perspective. Today, we're lucky enough, we've got a partner and we've got two SMEs as part of today's session. I'm going to start by, opening it up to you guys to sort of introduce yourself. Brendon, let's start with you.
Sorry, gents, having a bit of issues getting it off for mute there for a second. Morning, everybody. Brendon, technology evangelist, founder of Techosity. We are a managed service provider, managed services security provider. Our purpose is to help clients strategically stay ahead of the game, and we do work quite extensively with the SME space, so anywhere from kind of 20 users up to 100, 150 users. I've got a extensive background in GRC. It's a bit of a passion of mine. I've been doing it from the SBS days, and thank you very much for the invite. Happy to be here and looking forward to hopefully impart some knowledge and provide some people with some key takeaways.
Thanks, Brendon. I'm really excited for you to be here because I really want the perspective from an MSP angle, which is why I invited you on, and it'll be great to sort of see where this goes today. Clinton, well, let's jump up to you next. Clinton from GRC from MSPs.
Elliot. Yes, I'm Clinton, Director of GRC for MSPs. My background is in the MSP industry. I worked for about 17 years in an MSP in Victoria, starting on the help desk, moving my way up to the leadership team there as the head of technology. But probably the last 5 or 6 years of that is we went through the ISO process and really bringing in that governance, risk and compliance into the MSP space. So what I bring to the table is obviously that experience in the MSP industry and working, knowing the nuances, the business structure and the goals of an MSP, and kind of bringing in the compliance over the top of that to help MSPs level up basically and meet those requirements and, look at ongoing that onto your clients as well and other services you might be able to offer.
Awesome. Thanks, Clinton. Great to have you on. And no stranger to the sort of Pax8 podcast, Jason, welcome.
Thanks, Elliot. Thanks for having me, guys. So I'm Jason Maricchiolo, the director of ISO 365, and we effectively just the startup. This year, I started this company, which was actually designed to help MSPs get themselves certified to ISO 27001. My background, my history is also in MSP, so head of ops for an MSP down in Melbourne for 12 years, and then obviously worked at another couple of MSPs as well. So happy to be here and to impart my knowledge as well, and happy to have a chat.
Thanks, Jason. Good to have you on again. Brendon, I just noticed your background cabinet is stacked. That must be something you go into quite a bit, being in the MSP space.
Hey, you got to do something when you're doing risk and compliance work, mate. Something to get you through. What is the worst thing that could happen to my business? That definitely needs a whiskey or a scotch.
That's right. All right, so let's get into it. So obviously today we're talking about culture of governance. I guess the first thing I want to sort of cover is what is governance. A lot of partners don't quite understand the concept or have trouble, and there are sort of different sort of categories of governance out there. I guess I'll throw it out to the partner first. I'll throw it out to you, Brendon. What is governance to you?
I like to simplify it, mate. I'm a simple man. It's how we govern the technology systems. That's all encompassing. It's the information, it's the systems, but fundamentally, it's the policies, procedures that we have in place to inform our organisation on how we actually govern.
Terrific. Couldn't have said it better myself. Jason?
I absolutely agree. For me, and basically how I work, it's mainly about having the right people accountable within the organisation. Right, the governance piece for me is quite linked to being accountable for a lot of things. And basically, the review piece as well, I think, is huge on the governance side. So a lot of people generally are okay with putting policies and procedures in, but then, everyone falls over at that review stage. No one goes back and has a look at, what risks we've accepted or things like that, right? So, yeah, for me, it's about putting in that review piece as well.
Great, thanks. Clinton, how about yourself?
Yeah, I definitely agree with both of those. For me, governments are kind of the guardrails of everything, right? So you got your people, system, processes, and the governance keeps you in the lines, keeps you colouring within the lines there. Because if you don't have that, things can go crazy. Next thing you know, you've got 100 systems you've got to manage and things are going everywhere. So it's really about making sure that you're aligning all those things to your business goals and your strategy and making sure they stay within those lines there.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing Jason sort of mentioned a second ago, which sort of triggered something in my brain. A lot of partners try to self-govern, right? They're, self-audit, basically do things themselves and sort of give them a pat on the back. What are your thoughts around that? How do you approach that? What are your recommendations around the ordering process and the governance process? Should they be working with a third party, an external provider to sort of do that check and balance? Or is it okay to do that internally? Jason, I'll start with you.
Yeah, look, from my perspective, I always think it's good to have a bit of separation or segregation between, even an internal audit. I mean, obviously, if you're going through an ISO journey, then at the end, obviously, there is your external audit and your surveillance audits. But I think those ongoing internal audits, it does help if you've got an extra set of eyes that is outside of the business having a look. Sometimes I find that you can get tempted to kind of brush over things because you've got other things to do if you're doing it internally as well. So it's like, oh yeah, this is, it's not an issue for me right now. Everything's looking good. Maybe I won't go and, check that backups are actually occurring or that we can actually do, restore from a backup or just something like that, right? So I always think from a governance perspective, it's always good to have, that external set of eyes or, a collaborative set of eyes when you're doing an internal audit.
Yeah, completely agree. Clinton, thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. Because what you can have is a little bit of bias, right? Because if they're self-governing the framework they're trying to work to or whatever system they're trying to do, and you're in charge of some of those things, you're not going to go out and say, I'm not doing this well or we've got gaps in here. Some people will, but generally there's some sort of level of bias or some sort of level of, because you're in the company, you don't see all the problems, right? Where you have someone else come in from the outside, they will ask different questions to different people and you'll get different answers and you can collate that all together and actually get a real summary of where you're at. I don't think there's a problem with any partners or anything starting internally and doing things themselves. There's lots of different frameworks, the Essential Aid, the ISO standard and NIST and all those kind of things out there you could look to align to. You don't need to get a third party or spend that money to start doing that. You can download the frameworks and you can just start to slowly align your processes and procedures to kind of meet that. And then when you think you're at a point where you want to actually go for certification, if it is a certifiable framework you're looking at, then you would bring in that third party just to do like the gap analysis and those checks and balances and get some of those real answers out.
Yeah, great. You just mentioned something. I'll come back to you. I'm getting a little bit of bleed. You just mentioned something that I'll come back to you in just a sec. I do want to get Brendon's opinion on this, coming from an MSP perspective. What do you do today? How do you govern?
So we use multiple frameworks. I think one of my colleagues actually presented at the SMBIT National Conference on them. But just to go back to the question, I totally agree. You can't have the fox watching the hen house. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. I also agree with Clinton in terms of you definitely MSPs are all at different stages. Some are startups; they may not have the budget to bring in an external auditor. So I would say if you've got nothing, then doing it yourself with self-auditing is better than doing nothing. And you've got to start somewhere. I think. Totally agree with that. In terms of what we do, we have an external, and you have to. So if you are, like I think Jason outlined, if you're doing ISO 27001, you can't get that accreditation without having an external person come in and confirm that there's no bias and like you say, it's all above board.
Yeah, completely agree with that as well. It is, one of those situations where if you don't have time, you can't afford it, but you have to do some sort of governance, self-governance. Is a starting point, right? But it, to Clinton's point, there is a potential for bias there, things to be missed, and I've seen
That's a
that
good point,
firsthand.
Elliot. That's probably one additional reason that you would engage an external is because if you do it, if you're going to self audit, you're never going to get to it because it's never going to be the most pressing, most urgent. And let's be fair, as MSPs, this is not what we enjoy doing. No one, well, I shouldn't say no one, I enjoy it, but there's very few people that actually love governance, risk, and compliance work. So it's always going to be one of those things like marketing that kind of falls to the side. So if you want to get it done, and I think we need to get it done, considering some of the privacy reforms and things that are coming into place and cyber insurance shift in that market and landscape, then maybe the best way for you to get it done is to get an external auditor in and someone to keep, as Jason said, keep you accountable and make sure you go through the process and actually complete it.
It also shows commitment,
Definitely.
right? Like if the leadership team or the owner is willing to spend money on an external auditor, then it shows they're kind of serious about taking governance, risk, and compliance and then wanting to go down that path. So it kind of flows down the business as well to show that this is happening and this is the direction we're going and get on board.
And it is a cultural piece, right? Like governance is great, having ISO 27001, but if it's just a tick box, like are we actually doing compliance or are we actually wanting to improve our security posture and actually make our organizations more resilient? Because most organizations, I would suggest, are in the former. They're doing it because XYZ entity, their largest client or their insurer or someone has come down and said, you must have this, you need to have this. And so it just becomes a box checking exercise, which typically doesn't change the culture. And that's what we're trying to shift, right? We're trying to elevate the team members that we have across all departments to make our organizations better resilient or more resilient to cyber attacks and threats.
All right. So coming back to you, Clinton, just want to sort of touch on frameworks, which you mentioned, and we talk a lot about frameworks here at Pax8. We typically focus on CI's controls as our selected global framework, only because of its pragmatic nature, very prescriptive and something to follow. It is not as well known here in Australia yet or across the APAC region, but it is something that we're driving hard. A lot of them are focused on the Essential 8, which you mentioned. Obviously, yourself and Jason have experience around ISO. But from your perspective, which framework should partners be looking at as a good starting point?
They should look at them all, really. What you'll find is when you actually start diving into them, there's a lot of overlap. They just use different words somewhere, or the controls name's slightly different. But overall, they're all trying to achieve mainly the same thing. The Essential 8 is a great one, and it's a great marketing term to put to customers because the government's pushing it, and they're trying to put that out there for all businesses. I personally like the ISO framework, the 27001, because it's an international standard and it's certifiable. So you can get a piece of paper that says we are certified against this standard. And it applies to any business, right? So while the MSP is doing it for themselves to prove to their customers and gain trust, they can then package up their services and say, well, being on our agreement, you meet these controls within the ISO and we can help you move technically with all the technical controls, we can help you move to this certification for themselves. And then they can use that for their customers. And it's kind of a big flowing thing. It's not kind of isolated to the MSP industry or to technology. You can use it with any business as such. And with all the overlaps, if you do ISO 27001, there's a lot that it covers with the Privacy Act, with CIS, with NIST, with Essential 8. Essential 8's a bit more technical, doesn't go into the governance side of things as much. But a lot of the controls within the ISO standard will cover the Essential 8 as a good starting point. Depends on your maturity, right? Like what you level up to and what you want to do there in your commitment.
Yeah, absolutely. Brendon, thoughts?
I'm got a slightly different view, obviously maybe coming from the MSP side. My first piece of feedback, and it doesn't matter whether it's MSP or a client, I think the very first thing is you've got to understand where your risks are. And my example for that is you could go and put in E8, and I was doing a consulting for a medium-sized hospitality client in Australia, quite large, very well known. And let's just take the E8 for example. When I spoke to this particular person and we did their the risk assessment workshop, their POS system, which I thought would have been the crown jewels and the absolutely, we cannot have this thing offline. And they said, no, that's no big deal for us. We've got manual systems. Everybody's trained in them. We've had to do it before. We can operate pretty much indefinitely on manual systems. Yes, it requires higher costs and more labor, but where they actually were at risk is their loyalty program and that system that had an API that was exposed to the internet. So let's just take E8. And if we had applied E8 to this particular client, in my opinion, it gives you a false sense of security because, hey, we've got E8, we're secure and we're resilient and we're maturity level 3 and, we've spent this money and we're all good. But then when you really look at the risk, it didn't address the risk at all because where they're vulnerable, the E8 doesn't apply. So the very first thing I would suggest we do is go and do an actual risk assessment workshop. And as you mentioned before, I've got an extensive collection of alcohol behind me because it's hard, right? You sit down and go, okay, well, what would sink the business tomorrow? What would be the absolute worst thing that could occur? And having to do that, with the client and then really go, okay, so now we've got all these frameworks and controls. And I don't disagree with Clinton. I really do like ISO 27001 for the reasons he's already raised. If you're investing as an MSP or anyone for that matter, client, it's nice to have a piece of paper that you can hang your hat on and show to clients, improve. Yep. Things like the E8, you can get an assessment, but you can't get an accreditation towards it. And I like ISO because it's got the whole risk framework around it, and it's the governance piece is there. It's not just a set of static controls like some of the others. SIS is definitely better, but ISO I find is I guess more encompassing. My only caveat to that would be what you've got the time and budget to do. So if you've got nothing, what we're trying to do is elevate your posture and resilience. E8 having that and doing that is better than having nothing and doing nothing. So if that's all you can do now, then let's do that.
Yeah, I say the same thing around the Situate. It is it is something that should be considered a baseline and only a baseline. There's a lot more to it that to security in general and governance that's not included in something that like the Essential 8. So there's always more we can do, go above and beyond. But it is an evolution at the end of the day. So like you mentioned, Brendon, you got to start somewhere, and the Essential 8 might be your starting point. But this is something that you want to look at down the track over the next 24 to 36 months about, where do you get to next? Do you do the ISOs? Do you use CIS to sort of get you part way there, or something like that? Jason, thoughts around frameworks?
For me, it's always been, where possible, it's like it's an and, not an or. So it's like, Essential 8, absolutely, start there and, everybody should at least be looking, that's half the reason why I think the government brought in the Essential 8. It's like, we need everyone to do something, right? Like just a little bit, please, just do something, right? And I think once that ball starts to roll, then it becomes, all right, what's next? All right, is it maturity level 2, or maybe is it, do we look at bringing in an information security framework like an ISO that's going to help us from basically across the whole business, right? I definitely think that there's a lot of frameworks out there that focus more on the technological controls, and as Brendon was saying, they actually do make you a lot more secure from a technological perspective. But it's also good to underpin that with a framework, in my opinion, as well, because making sure that we're looking at the people side of a business as well as the technological side, for me, is critical. And that's a lot of what I do. Is I love actually training the people around where they can actually help as well, right? So it's not just about the technology for me; it's about the people too.
Yeah, you touch on something that a lot of partners make the mistake of is trying to close a gap by throwing a tool at it, right? Buying a product out there, throwing at it, and hopefully, that covers that checkbox. And from an insurance perspective and some other regulatory bodies, that could tick that box. But they're missing the process. They're missing the policies behind it. They're missing the training that needs to be done as part of rolling out something through cybersecurity. They don't necessarily go through and sort of help the end users or the end clients to better understand what they should and should not be doing. And you're right, CIS, Essential 8, a bunch of other stuff, that's all technical controls. CIS in particular is obviously a technical control that's come off the back of NIST, right? So those are the type of things that you should be thinking about when you're selecting your framework is it's not just about technology, it's about everything else. It's about the people, it's about the process as well. Any other comments before I move to the next question?
The analogy that I like to use, sorry, Brendon, the analogy I like to use there, Elliot, is you take your house, right, and you could put a security gate. You can have a really secure gate, and you can have a video doorbell, and you can have a secure lock on the door. But if the person inside is just completely oblivious to who's out there and just starts unlocking stuff, right, it's the person that was the weakest link. And so just going back to that, I always use that analogy because no matter what you throw at it technically, you still need the fundamentals to understand.
Yeah, I use the house analogy all the time. It's a great one.
You hit and maybe that's another topic there, but I think the whole approach from an industry perspective is needs improvement and kind of could be better. I think we do tend to focus on what we know, and having been I came from an MSP background. As in, I later in my career transitioned across to the governance, risk, compliance, and cyber because I found a bit of a passion for it. But initially, I was on the infrastructure and the architecture side, and so as my architecture hat and brain, when you present this problem, we want to approach it with technical controls. Technical controls being firewalls and endpoint security and the things that Jason mentioned. Whereas, as I highlighted before, that it's probably not so much the wrong approach, but I think it's just putting the cart before the horse, so to speak. We need to understand what the problem is first. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? Where is our biggest risk to the organization? And then go and look at what controls may be appropriate to help reduce that risk. And to your point before, around the frameworks, quite often we start with ISO, for example, and then say, okay, well, to treat this particular risk, we're going to implement E8 controls for this specific set of assets, because that makes sense. It reduces the risk profile of those assets, which then helps the business achieve its goals.
Yeah, great points. On that, just to sort of move it along a little bit, Brendon, from a MSP perspective, what does I know the sort of response I'm going to get from Jason and Clinton on this particular question, but
mind reading now.
getting ISO certified, at least from our side, we recommend it because it can open up a lot more opportunities in terms of exploring new client base.
Yeah.
A lot of insurance providers are recommending or requiring ISO as a certification now as well. What type of clients do you see being opened up as part of something that you can sort of work with as being ISO certified, or sort of really focusing on that GRC aspect?
Accounting firms, medical industry, local government, local council. That's where I'm seeing it. I mean, NDIS providers, for example, and a lot of the NDIS providers that were under DESI had to, ones that were over a certain revenue stream, they had to then go and implement what was called right fit for risk. And right fit for risk was fundamentally an ISO 27001 information security management system. Those types of clients had to, they didn't have a choice. And this is one of the problems, I think, at the moment for MSPs at least. ISO 27001 is not a small investment. I'd suggest that, you could see it as a cost, or you can see it as an investment and something that you can, creates a differentiation for yourself. That comes down to how you market and so forth. But it's not cheap. And it's not cheap. It impacts how you operate, right? Like, you can't be cowboys. You've got change management controls in place, and it changes the way your organization operate. Now, I'd say it is for the better. It matures an organization to help reduce your risk. But because of that, no one's going to elect to do it on their own. And at the moment, there's not enough client demand that it's losing MSPs money. MSPs can, if it's got 10 opportunities, one may require ISO 27001. Now, I agree, and I think it's definitely changing. We're definitely seeing a shift. We've from all areas. In the insurers are starting to look at it now. Anyone that works with local government, local council are starting to see it. It wouldn't surprise me if the RACGP, so the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, your CPA Australia, these entities who are already pretty across this stuff. Like, they've been pushing standards for quite some time now. if they start to turn around and start, requiring, okay, within the next 3 years, we want you to achieve ISO 27001. I mean, even at the highest levels of government, we've got our cyber minister, Claire. She's pushing for the cyber, the 2023 cybersecurity strategy. She's made it very clear that as a country, we're trying to elevate the security posture of all entities, and also we want to try to create a really resilient country, because we're not overly resilient as it is. So I think we're going to see quite a lot of it. I'm starting to certainly see it. We've got some accounting firms and so forth. All of our not-for-profits that are federally funded or even state funded are now also requiring it. So I think there's going to be a big opportunity for it, and it definitely opens doors. The other thing I just preface it, definitely get in touch with Clinton or Jason. It sounds like a monumentous task. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? If you do engage a professional, it really becomes quite easy. It's just a weekly meeting. We're going to start with this small part, and then we move to the next small part and to the next small part, and they'll go as fast or as slow as you need to. So it's not impacting your operations. You don't have to go and hire someone else. Sorry, I sound like a sales pitch. Well, I guess what I'm saying is people see it as a monumentous task, and really it's not as bad and big as you think it may be.
It doesn't have to be. That's right. I think you sort of hit the nail on the head there. Partnering with the experts and know what they're doing, and this comes across all aspects, not just governance, not just cybersecurity. Anything that you don't have a good knowledge base of, or don't have the time to sort of prepare for, that's something you should be partnering with outside experts. Bring them in, help them sort of grow your business, help them sort of get yourself on track.
Think about why your clients are approaching you for the cyber services, right? Because they don't know. Like, we did some ISM stuff, the information security manual for big enterprise, and they have cyber teams and so forth that they could leverage to do it. The reason they ask for assistance and bring us in is because of the experience we've had delivering it for lots of different industries and different clients. So you're not just overlaying, okay, this is what this control means and this is how you need to implement it, but and this is how other organizations have done it. And that's really where the value is.
Excellent plug there for the gents. Done my job for me. I don't have to do it later.
There's one thing I do want to add, Elliot, on the ROI kind of discussion as well. I always get asked, how soon can I, recoup my costs, or how much business is this going to get me? And I always go back and I say, absolutely, we hope and we expect that this will help you, with future business opportunities. But what I always say is, you can't really put a cost on a client that is potentially already looking to leave because you don't fit their risk profile anymore, right? And so it's an unknown piece there as well. So although I do always, like I said, when's this going to start making me money? It's about looking the other way as well, and the client retention piece is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a hard ROI to track sometimes for many partners who don't have the correct systems and the way to track it. But it's just definitely something to think about. Clinton, I wanted to come to you on that previous point around what type of clients it sort of opens up, because you uniquely, obviously, an implementer now for ISO, but you also go still or previously worked recently in an MSP that was heavily focused around ISO. What type of opportunities does that open up for your previous MSP?
Yeah, pretty much like what Brendon was saying. A lot of professional services organizations, your accountants, your lawyers, your health, they're getting regulated, right? So they are then looking at the risk profile. So they're doing the same thing you do as part of the ISO process, right? You look at your risk and who are your major suppliers? Well, the biggest probably supplier is your MSP, right? They've got the keys to all your kingdom. If they get breached or they're not doing their job in protecting that information, everything's gone for the customer. Basically, no one can operate without computers or information these days. So while they might not be asking for it yet, their industries are going to demand that at some point, especially with talks of reforms around the Privacy Act and maybe an alignment more to GDPR and things like that. It's going to come back at you, and you've got to be in front of that, because ISO, it doesn't need to take years, but it isn't a 2-week engagement. And the faster you go, the more it costs and the more pain there is in transitioning. So it's up to the business to decide that, but you want to be in the front foot. You don't want to be reactive when 10 of your clients in a certain industry come to you and say, actually, by financial year, we need you to be ISO certified. Can you get to that, please? That's going to really impact your business being on that back foot. Yeah.
It's a great point, Clinton. I always say that you right now you think that your business is exactly where it needs to be, but the moment someone kind of says, "Hey, I need this," you're now 6 months behind, and no one wants to be in that position.
No, definitely not. And Clinton, you touched on the supply chain issue, and I won't go too much into that because that's a rabbit hole that I could get lost in for hours. But with MSPs being big risks as part of a supply chain, particularly for SMBs, how does that work from your own internal risk in terms of insurance and there's no regulations in our industry, but being ISO 27001 certified. Does that, from an insurance perspective, reduce your premiums? Does that sort of have an impact in terms of what the insurance companies look for?
Yeah, it definitely can. It depends on the insurer, depends what they're looking for. Some of them are not quite up to the digital age yet. They'll ask for some very basic controls like MFA and, policy to be in place. But you'll find that they'll move towards like looking more at frameworks like ISO to meet that because it's more around the information protection. Because that's a real value, right? If your systems get breached, okay, systems are breached, but it's when the data is taken out that's when things become bad, right? That's your reputational, financial, all those kind of risks that are involved there. So yeah, you got to be careful about that.
Yeah, definitely. Brendon, thoughts?
I can say I think I agree with Clinton. A lot of it depends on the insurer. Keep in mind, there's a lot of insurers, but the underwriters, there's only a handful of them. So the questionnaires you get are generally the same. I definitely think it can with the right insurer. Again, I think it depends on what controls you've implemented, the scope of your ISMS. Like, I don't think there's unfortunately, a short answer to this question, but it definitely can. Insurers that are focused on information protection. So if you see lots of questions around data loss prevention, those insurers typically will look at, if you've got an ISO 27001 certification, and certainly reduce your premium. By how much is uncertain. But yeah, I think it definitely can. I've certainly seen it with my clients. I've got an accounting firm, for example, that's just completed it, and they've seen a significant reduction in the double digits. So
It all
That's what
comes
you mentioned
down.
there, Brendon. Sorry, you go, Jonathan.
No, I was just going to say it all comes down to your risk profile, for the insurer to take you on as a client, right? So
yeah.
what I would suggest for anyone that's listening, when you're actually going for your renewals, package up everything you've got, right? That can actually show, if you are doing the right things within your company. You might not be certified yet, but that doesn't mean that it's a yes or a no kind of question. Send them, policies or procedures or things that you can share, because they'll package that up. It'll be an overall risk profile for your company, and then your premium will come from that. So yeah, just that's what I would do.
I'll just caveat that to make sure that yes, do that, but only if you're following the policies.
Yes, correct. Yes.
Because
Thanks,
otherwise
Brendon.
you're giving them evidence to deny your claim.
Absolutely.
Clinton, you popped in.
Oh, I was just going to ask Brendon about clients coming to you as an MSP and asking you to fill out their insurance forms.
Yes.
How do you tackle that, and how do you feel about that?
So
Great
it's a
question.
billable project for us, and we go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and we actually present. So we take the questions and produce an addendum document. We outline, all of the client's controls. We give them a bit of a brief, network diagram, etc. And then we also answer each question. But when we're answering the question, we go and define it, because the challenge with insurance companies, and hopefully there's no insurance companies listening, but fundamentally, it's a business and it's there to make money. And largely those questions are written by lawyers, not by risk managers. So they're there and designed to be very broad, such that when it comes time to claim, they've got some wiggle room around, whether they can or approve or deny it. So what we do is try to take all of that that broadness out and be very, if, for example, they talk about a perimeter, we'll say, by perimeter, we're interpreting that as the edge at these locations. And then at these locations, these are the controls that we have, and these are the risks that they mitigate, and this is the risk profile, and so forth. Now, the problem with that is obviously that response becomes a rather expensive document. So, if you're just going to spend dollars to actually get a response and then have to pay your premium for your cyber insurance, it becomes a little bit of an expensive exercise. But I'd also preface that by if you are going to do that, you need to make sure that you've got the appropriate accreditation and qualification to do so. We do, and I've got it personally, but I've also got another person on my team that also is qualified to do that, and that's why we can offer that service and do it. If you don't, I would definitely engage someone to help you with that. There's plenty of organizations around there that will partner with you and work with you to kind of understand that. Jason, Clinton, maybe back to you guys. I mean, if you're engaged with a client to help them deliver ISO 27001, do you help them, I guess, for their own personal insurance, help them fill out those forms?
From our perspective, not really. We don't help them fill it in per se. I would take your approach if that was to actually happen and really define it, because you're right. The questions that always get asked are so open-ended, and effectively by the time you're done with one of those questionnaires, you've almost written the equivalent of an SOA, a statement of applicability for that client, right? So there is a ton of work that's being asked, and it's all just being pushed uphill or pushed to somebody else. So it's critical, like you said, to make sure that whatever your answer is, you're defining the question for them up front. But yeah, we don't generally provide that advice unless it's policy based or something that is coming in from our stack that we can say, yes, you now have this, and we've performed the audit, and we can say that you're actually doing it. You can actually say this now.
Yeah. I just
with the addendums, so Brendon, you sort of touched on that. It is definitely something that takes a bit of time and a lot of work. But it is important because a lot of insurance providers, as you guys mentioned, their questions can be fairly broad, right, and generic. But if we look at something as simple as MFA as an example, right?
Yeah.
Do you have MFA, right? Well, what's the answer to that? Is it a checkbox? Because yes, I've got MFA on my Microsoft 365. But what about your accounting software? What about your CRM? What about do you have MFA on every single machine and every single piece of software you're using? The answer is typically probably going to be no. So that then becomes important in those situations to be defensible, right? And we talk about defensible. I talk about defensible quite a bit when approaching cybersecurity, because that is something that is going to protect you in the court of law, right? If the insurance companies or the client comes after you in a situation where you do have an incident. And I guess from a governance perspective, particularly from an ISO side of things, that's something that you go through with a fine-tooth comb and really sort of analyze each piece of asset that you have in that environment to make sure that you're checking those boxes, or at least articulating or putting workarounds in place, right? And some sort of mitigating factor, whether it's a jump box in between that has MFA for a box that doesn't have MFA by default. So those are the type of things that are very, very important in terms of actually documentation. And that documentation is probably going to be what saves you at the end of the day to have that defensible argument, right? I know some of you sort of jumped in there, but I want to hear from Clinton on that before we sort of move ahead.
On the advice about the insurance forms. So yes. I agree with Jason. We wouldn't fill them out. But I guess as part of going through that ISO journey, there's probably a lot of those answers to questions that the organisation already knows as just going through that process when it comes to those questions. So it's just mainly us pointing them in the right direction. Hey, you've actually already got this over here in this policy, or hey, that's part of that relates to this control over here. You should write down, kind of what you're doing in that space. And that would be where we would kind of come into kind of advise, but we would just be pointing you in the direction of things you already know or you've already implemented as part of that process.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Great advice so far. We're almost at the 40-minute mark, so I want to sort of start rounding it out. I want to sort of hear sort of last thoughts around, and I'll start with you, Brendon, around advice for partners looking at getting into the governance space. I know you've mentioned if you don't have the expertise and knowledge to sort of partner, but for those more mature partners that are sort of actively looking at it, what are your key takeaways and what's your key advice?
So for partners that have the skills, and not necessarily the skills, but if you've got people in there that are passionate about it and that want to actually take that on, definitely try to develop your people. There's lots and lots of resources out there now to help, really drive cyber talent in Australia. I mean, plenty of it around worldwide now. Start small would be my advice. And if you are just starting out, I would still encourage you strongly to utilize a partner. Even if you think you are qualified, even if you think if it's your first engagement, first, second, third, I'd still highly encourage you to have a partner there and say to them, look, I want to engage you to help me with this piece of work. This is the outcomes I want to do. I want you in the meetings. I'll do the reporting and documentation and so forth, but I want a second pair of eyes over it. As I mentioned, we've got 2 in our organization, and every piece of work that I produce goes out to another party to eyeball and to review. And consequently, their work also comes across for me to review because, and I think we've spoken about it a little bit today, having a second pair of eyes, someone that's completely separate to it that hasn't looked at it before, asks different questions, maybe interprets risk differently, and it's saved me numerous times now. Where they've said, okay, but what about? I'm like, yeah, but it's not really a risk. Oh, but what about if this happened and that happened? And okay, yeah, well, in that instance, it could actually be. Just generally, most cyber, what are we going to call them? Certification bodies, really push the development of the cyber industry. So you'll find most cyber professionals that are qualified are pretty keen to kind of help you and provide advice and mentoring, because it's part of our ethos. Once you get qualified, we really want to advance the industry. We really want to try to help. Certainly, it's a passion for our organisation is to help elevate Australia as a country, and really try to make us more cyber resilient. So, if I had to have one tip and one takeaway, it would be definitely partner, even if you are qualified and starting out, to just give you the guidance and assistance.
Great advice. I think having some sort of certification helps you stand out from the crowd, right? Other MSPs, everyone's sort of claiming to be can claim to be a GSC expert or a cybersecurity expert or whatever the takeaway is, but having that certification sort of really gives you that reputational.
Just before, I know we're almost at time, and maybe it's a topic for another session, but also just think, if you aren't qualified and you try to deliver this type of work, you really are taking on a lot of risk, and we can develop and go into that another time.
Definitely.
But just be really aware of what you are developing if you are delivering cyber services, because there's a whole set of risk that you assume when you start to deliver that.
Yeah, it looks like we're going to have to do another one of these sessions and have you back on, Brendon. But Clinton,
if you haven't noticed already, I really like talking. So you need to have one of those.
That's why I'm here. Clinton, we'll go to you before jumping on to Jason. What's your advice for partners sort of getting started or going along their journey?
It starts somewhere, right? We talked earlier about, it doesn't matter which framework or what standard you want to go for, just start with something. It's better than nothing, whether that's the Essential 8 or going into the ISO journey or anything like that. The other piece of advice I have is nobody starts from zero. There's no business that is running and successful that has nothing in place. So I would actually advise that you go and get a gap analysis done as your first point of call, because you might find you're actually closer to where you need to be to look at a certification like 20701, which is some dot the I's, cross the T's kind of thing, or at least gives you a plan of, hey, we can work on these things offline or over the next year, 24 months, whatever you want to do there. So then when we bring in the expert, or we want to go down that journey and start to invest more into it, that you know where you need to get to and you know what that journey is going to kind of look like, and kind of put a timeline and a cost even maybe towards that. So that would be my suggestion there. And just to, even if clients aren't looking at it now, I think everyone should start looking at it in some way, even if it's doing it in your own time without any kind of expense at all.
Yeah, I didn't really touch on this today, but the Privacy Act reforms that are coming are probably going to make things like governance something that is going to come into focus a lot more. It is things that are going to law. From what I've seen, it looks very GDPR-like, which is really around protecting sensitive information, PII data, and a lot of that's going to come down to having good governance practice. When you look at NIST as well, NIST has added a 6th component to their framework, which is governance, right? So those are the type of things that are actively looked at, and from a certification perspective is probably going to become more relevant as we move forward, particularly around, as Brendon mentioned before, around the new cybersecurity strategy that's just been released for Australian partners in particular. I think I hope some of those changes will actually be put into law so that we can force that increase in standard that you talked about. Jason, we'll finish with you. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so basically with mine, I'll take a commercial approach because that's probably the operations side of me coming out. But I don't want anybody to get to a point where they haven't been thinking about it and now they're really faced with losing a lot of their clients or some of their client base. So my advice is to just start thinking about it now, because everyone generally thinks, we'll do it in 2024. Well, 2024 is next month, right? And we all know what kind of runways look like and all that kind of stuff. So, you really should start to think about things, 6 months to 12 months in advance. Find out what that's going to look like. Talk to a bunch of people. Like Brendon said, people will talk about this stuff and give you all of the advice for free, I'm sure. I know that I will. If anyone wants to talk about ISO, I'm generally going to give them all of the information that I can up front because it helps them make better decisions by the time they need it. From my perspective, just start really thinking about it, get ahead of, where you think it's going to be, and just start asking questions and be inquisitive.
Yeah, great advice. All right, we'll round it out there. Brendon's already given you guys a great plug, but I will tag you on the post for any partners looking at sort of getting started on that ISO journey or want to talk about governance. Brendon, I'm sure you'd be happy to speak to some partners as well. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you'll be tagged as well. So if anyone wants to reach out to you to have a quick chat around what you could be doing a bit more around this, and hopefully we'll follow up with a second session with some of you gents. But appreciate your time today. It was a fantastic session. Hopefully a lot of partners listening will get a little bit out of your advice and your thoughts and set themselves up for a massive 2024, which is just around the corner. Thank you again, gents. Appreciate you having you on. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Elliot.
Thanks, Elliot.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye. Bye.